Earlier today, I made a video regarding the XRP ETF and if it was a failure or not. Because again, with the XRP ETF, we witnessed the market also selling off right around the same exact time. Coincidence? I think not. I talked about that as well. I'm pretty sure, manipulation is definitely happening. Some market makers are, just basically shaking the tree yet again. And it definitely does align perfectly with good news happening around XRP. You could call me a tinfoil hat wearer or whatever you want to call me, but I just feel as if there's way too many times where we have witnessed XRP performing very well just to have the rug pulled out from under us with Bitcoin controlling the market. But regardless of that, the main thing that I wanted to really address with the ETF discussions is the amount of demand that is there for these ETF products. I feel as if Canary, I think the biggest thing to focus on with the Canary Capital XRP ETF is the size of Canary Capital. They are not a big name. However, they just broke massive records. And I think that when we look at the supply of XRP, a lot of people think that like 60 billion or even 100 billion is crazy. They think that it's a crazy amount, and they think that that's going to hold and suppress the price of these old coins forever. I think that the craziest thing is that the fact that people still think that when we have major players like BlackRock, which have $10 trillion in assets under management, entering the space, talking about tokenizing every single asset out there in the world, talking about real estate, which is valued well over $300+ trillion. And again, this is happening now. We're starting to see tokenization accelerating. We're also starting to see stablecoin initiatives becoming a reality. When you have names like BlackRock telling us every single asset out there will be tokenized, the supply of these old coins, it doesn't mean anything anymore. Market cap itself kind of gets thrown out of the window because again, I look at the fully diluted value of XRP and we're going off the 100 billion supply here. $226 billion when we know Ripple is targeting trillions on top of trillions of dollars and wanting to involve XRP and the XRPL in almost every single one of those moves. The supply is not enough. I can't stress that enough. This is what makes me very bullish on the long-term future ahead for projects like Hedera, which have, 50 billion supply, or even other projects that have significantly less like QNT. But let's talk about one announcement that I saw earlier today before we really get into the ETF discussions and talking about how the supply of XRP is vanishing on exchanges. Let's first start off with Evernorth, because going back to October, we did get the big update from Ashish Birla, which was a previous employee at Ripple. I'm proud to share that we've launched Evernorth XRP, a first of its kind institutional vehicle built to accelerate XRP adoption. With over a decade of uptime and a rapidly growing DeFi ecosystem, XRP is well positioned for adoption, and Evernorth is built to meet that moment. And yeah, we are starting to see a lot of things around the XRP ecosystem accelerate in a big way, and institutional grade adoption is definitely a big one. But also institutional DeFi. Institutional DeFi is becoming a reality. We already have institutional players here that are tokenizing, that are also locked in on stablecoin initiatives. And the next phase of that is incorporating DeFi. So we'll most likely have institutional liquidity pools, lending and borrowing around specific assets. I just feel as if a lot of people are overlooking how big institutional DeFi will be, especially at a time where, the biggest names, like I said, are already here tokenizing. And the XRP ledger was specifically built for this moment, so I'm very excited about the future for XRP and the XRPL. But on top of that, right, we just witnessed a $200 million investment into Evernorth. All right. This is with SBI Group. So they are investing $200 million into Evernorth, the largest public XRP treasury company. There's been a lot of investments announced around Evernorth. I do think that at the end of the day, this will most likely be one of the biggest projects, or if you want to call it projects. I just feel like this is one of the biggest moves happening around the XRP Ledger side of things. I'm very excited about seeing some of these recent announcements and some of these big expansions happening with, it could be treasury companies, it could be, dApp developers, or, even the EVM sidechain. All of this stuff builds on top of what we already were bullish on when it comes back to XRP. So this all reinforces XRP and the XRPL in a big way, which makes it even more bullish for the future ahead, because these will lead to major expansions around key things within the XRP ecosystem, like, for example, institutional DeFi and beyond. Now, with that, okay, I want to talk about ETFs, because the ETFs are essentially an institutional vehicle for retail to dive on in, but it also reinforces institutional demand of XRP. Looking at the XRP ETF from Canary Capital, like I said, Canary is not a massive name. When we are thinking about Canary, I remember when Canary was originally announcing plans for ETFs, and everyone was like, well, is Canary Capital even like that big of a name? And technically speaking, no, they're not a huge name. But the fact that this, company this size recorded over $250 million in market value tied back to the XRP ETF already shows us how much demand there is for XRP. 100 and almost 9 million XRPs already locked up in holdings from Canary Capital. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, especially when we go back to the fact that there is 60 billion XRP out there, but this is just one name. I saw a great post from Vincent Kennedy, Vincent Crypt 46 over on X. Bitwise Solana ETF BSOL did $57 million on launch. Bitwise has around $15 billion in assets under management. Canary Capital's XRP ETF, XRPC, did $58 million on launch. Canary has under $100 million in assets under management. Bitwise applied for an XRP ETF. This is just the start. And yes, this is what I mean by looking at the size of Canary compared to these other ETF issuers. And yes, Franklin Templeton is another one that has 1.6 trillion in assets under management that also has an XRP ETF waiting approval. This is a name that a lot of big players are aware of. Retail knows Franklin Templeton. If we see an ETF or XRP approved by Franklin Templeton, or even Bitwise, it will be bigger than Canary, in my opinion, because it is a larger name, it's a more well-known name, and that's why when we really think about how big this launch was, it's 10 times bigger. I don't care about the $58 million on launch, okay? I don't care about the $58 million on launch. I don't even care about the $250 million already tied back to this. I care about the fact that a name the size of Canary Capital recorded this volume. That's what I care about. It's insane to think about how successful this launch was from a name like Canary. And when we think about that, how has the market reacted? How has the supply on exchanges reacted to this? Because now we are starting to essentially see Canary buying these shares OTC to support this ETF. And this is where we start to see the supply on exchanges plunging. Coin Bureau posted this earlier yesterday. XRP supply on exchanges plunges. Over 149 million XRP worth about 336 million exited centralized exchanges in just 24 hours. What could this be? What's happening here? Well, let's think about it. Okay? We have the ETF, right? We definitely have a lot of purchases happening because of the ETF. That's definitely a big one. The market sell-off is another one as well. This could be leading to whales buying up XRP, taking it off of exchanges, but then also major buys for the ETF, also taking that off of exchanges. I don't really think that the ETF is going to affect the supply on exchanges so much, simply because that's typically OTC. But I do think that the ETF announcement led to a lot of whales buying up XRP on a down day. But the fact that we are seeing this much XRP getting taken from exchanges in just 24 hours tells us how much, again, demand there is. This is why when I look at all of the pending ETFs, the Franklin Templeton, the Bitwise, the 21 Shares, the Grayscale, the Wisdom Tree. Big shout out to Chad Steingruber for this, but when we are looking at all of these dates, the 18th is definitely a big focus. Bitwise is the next 2 days. 21 Shares is the same day and then the next 2 days after. Grayscale is the 25th. Wisdom Tree is the 25th. When we are looking at all of these names, okay, some of these names have massive amounts of money tied back to them. They also have a massive reputation as well tied back to them. If we are already witnessing supply diminishing on exchanges and we're starting to see a ton of XRP already locked up in Canary's holdings with over 108 million, almost 109 million, imagine how much XRP is going to get locked up from all of these players. I don't think that we're going to lead to a supply shock initially. Long term, I could see it happening, but for now, again, we're still very early. I do think that, 1%, 2%, possibly even, higher percentage, like 5% of the supply could definitely get locked up from these ETFs. And that's definitely a big deal. But again, we're watching as XRP diminishes on exchanges in terms of the actual supply, which is telling us that something is happening behind the scenes. We're watching as demand picks up. I also want you guys to realize that we're still very early on XRP. Just going off of the rich list, right? And we don't really care about, what percentage we're in or anything like that. Obviously, these values have, they've definitely increased significantly, right? Like to get into like the top 1%, you need almost 50,000 XRP. It's kind of crazy to look at this, but what I'm really looking at is how many wallets are out there. 7.2 million wallets. Again, we have 60 billion supply, 100 billion total supply. We're starting to see ETFs becoming a reality. We're starting to see supply on exchanges, diminish greatly. A lot of people will say that we're late to XRP right now. A lot of people will say like there's no way that a supply shock will eventually happen. There's only 7.2 million wallets for XRP. 99+% of the world still is unaware of what XRP is. 7.2 million wallets, and how many of those 7.2 million wallets, how many of those are duplicates or maybe even more than, 2 wallets held by one single individual? I know a lot of people in this space that have 5, 10 plus different wallets. I'm saying this because, again, we are still in the early phases of institutional grade adoption. We just had our first official 100% spot-based XRP ETF go live. And supply is already getting eaten up right now. Think about how much bigger XRP is going to be. Think about how much more supply of XRP is going to get locked up and taken off of exchanges. We are still we're still just preparing for the race. We're soon going to see this accelerate in a big way. this is what gets me very bullish on the ETF already. We have so much more left in front of us to, see get approved, but we're already seeing this affect supply in a big way. And no, this doesn't have to correlate directly back to the ETF. I just feel as if whales are buying up XRP because they are also aware of how successful this ETF has been. And they also know that there's going to be a ton of additional ETF approvals happening at some point this month or, in the remainder of 2025. So even with this down day, even with the market sell-off, I'm still not flipping at all on XRP. I'm still extremely bullish on XRP going forward. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video.